This audio was never meant to be found casually. It was not designed for scrolling, nor for passing curiosity. It waits for those who arrive at the edge of their knowing, those who feel the quiet pressure of something awakening just beneath the surface of awareness. If you are listening now, understand this. You did not stumble here by chance. You were guided by a timing older than thought, drawn by a signal you couldn't name but could not ignore. What follows is not motivation, it is not belief. It is not even teaching in the way the world understands teaching. This is a remembering. There are moments when the veil thins, when the ordinary laws loosen their grip and the hidden architecture of reality becomes briefly visible. Midnight has always been such a threshold, a pause between days, a doorway between identities, a still point where the mind grows quiet enough for truth to speak. This audio was hidden because it works best when the world is not watching. It rearranges perception. It alters internal timing. It restores something ancient that modern life trained you to forget. Listen carefully, not with effort, but with openness, not to gather information, but to allow alignment. What you are about to hear is not for everyone, and once heard, it cannot be unheard. Proceed gently, and whatever you do, do not rush. Chapter 1. The Hour Between Worlds. There is a reason this hour has always been whispered about rather than explained. Midnight is not merely a time on the clock. It is a suspension, a soft collapse of one cycle before another dares to begin. The world exhales here. Lights dim, voices retreat, and something ancient stirs in the quiet space left behind. Across civilizations long erased from maps, midnight was treated as a threshold rather than a moment. Temples were sealed at this hour, fires were kept low, words were chosen carefully, not because something dangerous emerged, but because something listening did. When the noise of the day dissolves, reality loosens its structure. The rigid edges of identity soften. The mind, no longer busy maintaining its performance, becomes porous. This is the hour when the subconscious rises closer to the surface, when the unseen currents of existence move without obstruction. You may have felt it without knowing what it was. That subtle alertness late at night, the strange clarity, the feeling that thoughts slow but awareness sharpens. It is not fatigue, it is proximity. Midnight exists between definitions. It is not yesterday, and it is not yet tomorrow. It is not action, and it is not rest. It is a corridor consciousness passes through when it forgets what it has been pretending to be. This is why decisions made at midnight carry unusual weight. Why realizations arrive uninvited. Why memories surface without context. The mind is no longer barricaded by intention. It becomes receptive rather than directive. And in receptivity, deeper truths find a voice. The ancients understood this not intellectually, but instinctively. They knew that certain doors do not open to force or repetition, but only to timing. Midnight was such a key, not because of darkness, but because of stillness. During the day, reality reflects effort. At night, especially at this hour, it reflects state. Whatever you are quietly holding beneath thought becomes amplified. Fear deepens, longing grows louder, but so does truth. This is why listening before midnight matters, not because the information is special, but because you are different. At this hour, the ego loosens its grip. The need to narrate fades. The internal commentator grows tired. And when it rests, the deeper intelligence, the one that has been running your life beneath awareness, steps forward. This intelligence does not speak in sentences. It communicates through sensation, through resonance, through recognition. It is the part of you that already knows when something is true, even before belief forms. The part that recognizes meaning before explanation. Midnight lowers the volume of resistance just enough for this recognition to pass through. That is why this audio was timed, why it does not work the same way in daylight, why hearing it casually misses its effect. At midnight, the boundary between observer and observed thins. You are no longer entirely inside your thoughts, nor fully outside them. You hover, and in that hovering perception widens. This is not mystical exaggeration, it is neurological and energetic. As the brain shifts towards slower rhythms, the subconscious becomes more accessible, patterns loosen, beliefs grow pliable, the internal locks that guard identity relax, not because they are broken, but because they are no longer needed. In this state, reality does not require persuasion. It requires alignment. Midnight is when alignment happens without effort. This is also why secrecy matters here. What enters awareness at this hour integrates quietly. It reshapes internal structure before the mind tries to label it. Speaking too soon pulls it back into analysis, where it dissolves into concept instead of becoming configuration. So listen without urgency, without expectation, without the need to understand immediately. Let the words pass through you rather than stop at comprehension. Let the pauses do their work. Let the silence between sentences speak as loudly as the sentences themselves. This hour does not demand belief. It only asks for presence. And if you are here now, listening before midnight, or standing close to its edge, know this: you are not preparing to receive something new. You are entering the space where what has always been true can finally be heard. Chapter 2. The Message Beneath the Noise. Most people believe reality is loud. They assume truth arrives through intensity, through repetition, urgency, or force. But the deeper architecture of existence operates in reverse. What matters most is often what cannot compete for attention. The message you are meant to receive is rarely announced. It is not broadcast. It does not shout. It waits beneath the noise, patient and precise, knowing that attention must descend before it can be perceived. Noise is not merely sound. It is mental movement, emotional reactivity, the endless internal narration that interprets, judges, predicts, and defends. Noise is the mechanism by which awareness stays occupied just enough to avoid deeper contact. This is not accidental. Modern life is engineered to keep consciousness slightly overstimulated, slightly rushed, slightly fragmented. Not because something sinister is always at work, but because distraction is efficient. A distracted mind is predictable. It reacts instead of receives. And yet, beneath this constant hum, something else persists. There is a quieter layer of intelligence moving at a different speed. It does not operate on urgency or fear. It does not require validation. It communicates through subtle shifts, an inexplicable pull, a sudden calm, a sense of this matters without explanation. You have felt it, perhaps while staring out a window late at night, perhaps in the pause between two breaths, perhaps in the strange stillness after a question dissolves instead of being answered. This intelligence does not interrupt. It waits until the noise thins. The mistake most people make is assuming silence is empty. They treat quiet as absence, as boredom, as something to fill. But silence is not the absence of information. It is the absence of interference. When interference drops, signal emerges. This is why moments of exhaustion sometimes bring clarity, why answers arrive in the shower, why insights surface just before sleep. The mind is no longer gripping the wheel, and something else gently adjusts the course. The message beneath the noise is not new knowledge. It is orientation. It does not tell you what to think. It recalibrates how you are positioned within experience. When you are aligned with it, effort decreases. Choices simplify. Events begin to arrange themselves with less friction. You may not feel euphoric, but you feel clear. And clarity is more powerful than excitement. Noise, on the other hand, always demands more. More input, more certainty, more reassurance. It feeds on urgency, convincing you that if you just think harder, plan better, or consume more information, you will arrive. But arrival does not come through accumulation. It comes through subtraction. This is why secrecy matters again here. Not secrecy from others, but from the compulsive habit of explanation. When you explain too soon, you translate signal back into noise. You compress something alive into something manageable, and in doing so, you flatten it. The message beneath the noise does not need to be understood immediately. In fact, trying to understand it too quickly is often how it disappears. It prefers incubation. Think of how a seed behaves underground. It does not announce its growth. It does not seek confirmation. It works quietly, reorganizing matter in darkness until the conditions are right for emergence. The message works the same way. It enters softly. It rearranges internally. It expresses externally only when ready. This is why some people change without being able to explain how. Their tone shifts. Their timing improves. Their life reorganizes around a quieter center. Others sense it before they articulate it themselves. The noise-driven mind wants proof. The deeper intelligence responds to trust. Trust here does not mean belief. It means allowing something to be incomplete without forcing closure. It means letting resonance guide before logic catches up. When you listen at this level, you stop asking, "What does this mean?" and begin asking, "What does this shift?" That question changes everything. Because the message beneath the noise does not come to decorate your understanding. It comes to adjust your trajectory. You may notice that certain habits lose their grip without effort, that certain desires feel less urgent, that certain fears no longer command the same authority. This is not suppression. It is reorientation. The volume of noise has not increased or decreased. Your sensitivity to signal has changed. Midnight supports this process because it naturally lowers the threshold of interference. But the skill itself is transferable. Once you learn to recognize the texture of signal, you can sense it anywhere. Beneath conversation, beneath conflict, beneath even your own thoughts. It feels slower, wider, more spacious, and it never argues. If you find yourself straining to hear it, you are listening from noise. If you feel a gentle settling, you are close. So do not chase the message. Do not interrogate it. Do not try to extract conclusions. Let it sit. Let it work. Let it rearrange quietly. Because what is being transmitted here is not information, it is alignment. And alignment, once established, speaks for itself, long after the noise has faded. Chapter 3. Why this was hidden. Nothing powerful disappears by accident. When knowledge vanishes across generations, it is rarely erased. It is set aside, preserved not in libraries or institutions, but in timing, in readiness, in the quiet understanding that some truths become dangerous only when encountered too early or too loudly. What you are hearing was hidden not because it is fragile, but because it is precise. There are forms of understanding that cannot be protected once exposed to mass interpretation. When a truth becomes popular, it is diluted. When it is argued, it is distorted. When it is packaged, it loses its orientation. So instead of being defended, it retreats. Not into secrecy, but into subtlety. This is how wisdom survives. Throughout history, there have been periods when humanity's nervous system was not capable of holding certain realizations without fracturing. When survival demanded obedience, speed, and certainty. When questioning the structure of reality threatened cohesion. In those eras, knowledge that loosened identity or softened authority had to move underground. Not erased, encoded. Stories replaced explanations, symbols replaced definitions, timing replaced permission. What was once openly spoken became whispered. What was once practiced publicly became internalized, and what could not be protected externally was hidden in plain sight, inside experience itself. This is why the truth you are encountering now does not arrive as a command or a doctrine. It arrives as recognition, as something that feels familiar rather than convincing. Because familiarity bypasses defense. It does not trigger the need to agree or disagree. It simply lands. The danger of this understanding was never chaos. It was autonomy. When individuals realize that perception shapes experience, that attention selects reality, that authority begins internally rather than externally, they stop being easily managed. They stop outsourcing meaning. They become harder to frighten into compliance or exhaust into submission. Such people do not rebel loudly. They withdraw consent quietly. And quiet withdrawal is far more destabilizing than open resistance. This is why the knowledge was hidden in the one place it could not be confiscated: the subjective. It was placed in sensation, timing, and inner recognition, areas no institution could regulate without first becoming conscious of them. But consciousness evolves. What once overwhelmed now integrates. What once threatened now stabilizes. And what once needed to be hidden can now be approached carefully without dismantling the systems that still serve. The hiding was never permanent. It was protective. Think of a child and fire. Fire is not evil. It warms, transforms, and illuminates, but placed in untrained hands, it destroys. So fire is hidden, not banned, but delayed, until the hands mature enough to hold it without burning everything down. This understanding is fire. It reveals that identity is flexible, that time is negotiable, that reality responds not to force, but to coherence. That belief is less powerful than orientation, and that awareness itself is the primary instrument of creation. Taken prematurely, these realizations can fracture meaning. They can dissolve structure before something stable has formed to replace it. This is not liberation. It is disintegration. So the truth waited. It waited until enough individuals could feel it without needing to weaponize it. Until it could be absorbed without becoming a badge, a movement, or a marketable identity. It waited until silence became tolerable again. You are not encountering this now because it suddenly exists. You are encountering it because the conditions within you are compatible. Something in your perception has slowed enough to receive without rushing to define. This compatibility matters more than belief. Belief is loud. Compatibility is quiet. The truth recognizes readiness not by what you know, but by how you listen. Not by your certainty, but by your restraint. Not by your enthusiasm, but by your capacity to let something remain unfinished. This is why you were not told earlier, not because you were unworthy, but because you were becoming. The knowledge hid not from you, but for you. And even now it does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds in layers, each one adjusting the internal environment so the next can land without distortion. This is not withholding. It is sequencing. What you are receiving now is not the whole structure. It is the orientation point, the internal shift that allows the structure to assemble itself naturally through lived experience rather than imposed explanation. You do not need to defend this understanding. You do not need to prove it. You do not need to share it widely. In fact, its integrity depends on how lightly you hold it. What was hidden stays alive by remaining unclaimed, by moving through those who can sense without grasping, recognize without announcing, and embody without performing. This is why it was hidden, and this is why now it can begin to surface, not as revelation, but as remembrance. Chapter 4. The Listener, Not the Hearer. There is a difference so subtle it escapes most people their entire lives. It is the difference between hearing sound and being present for what is transmitted, between receiving information and allowing meaning to rearrange you from within. Most people hear. Very few listen. Hearing is mechanical. The ears register vibration. The mind labels, categorizes, agrees, or resists. The process is efficient, fast, and largely automatic. Listening, however, is participatory. It requires a temporary surrender of position, a willingness to be changed by what arrives. This is why true listening feels vulnerable. When you listen at depth, you are no longer standing outside the experience, evaluating it. You are inside it, allowing it to pass through unfiltered. There is no immediate response, no inner commentary racing to the front. There is only attention, steady and open. The ancient distinction was clear. The hearer gathers words, the listener receives transmission. Transmission does not travel through logic. It travels through resonance. You may have noticed moments when something spoken carried far more weight than its literal meaning. A single sentence that lingered. A quiet phrase that stayed with you for years. The power was not in the words themselves, but in the state from which they were received. This is because the listener determines the depth of the message. When listening collapses into hearing, the mind remains in control. It decides relevance. It filters according to prior beliefs. It protects identity. Nothing truly enters. But when listening deepens, identity loosens its grip and something else steps forward. That something else is awareness itself. Awareness listens differently than the mind. It does not compare. It does not defend. It does not seek conclusion. It simply allows. This is why you cannot force yourself into true listening. The harder you try, the more the mind interferes. Listening emerges naturally when effort subsides, when attention becomes curious rather than goal-oriented. You are not here to extract meaning, you are here to host it. This is also why repetition does not deepen understanding. Hearing the same words again does not produce insight unless the listener has changed. When awareness shifts, the same sentence can reveal entirely new dimensions, not because the words evolved, but because the listener did. This audio does not require your agreement. It requires your presence. Presence is different from focus. Focus narrows. Presence widens. Focus seeks an outcome. Presence allows emergence. Focus tries to control the experience. Presence allows the experience to work. The listener is not passive, the listener is receptive, and there is a quiet authority in receptivity that force can never replicate. When you are fully present, reality responds. Not immediately, not dramatically, but precisely. Subtle adjustments occur, timing shifts, friction reduces, life reorganizes around a quieter center. The hearer misses this because the hearer is busy evaluating. The listener notices because the listener is available. This availability is not effortful, it is a state, one that often arrives late at night in stillness when the usual defenses grow tired. This is why listening before midnight carries a different quality. The hearer sleeps, the listener wakes. To become the listener, you do not need new skills, you need fewer habits, specifically the habit of filling space. Silence is not a gap to be closed, it is an invitation. When you allow silence to remain, without rushing to fill it with thought or reaction, something else moves in. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It feels like a subtle settling, a widening of internal space. In that space, listening becomes effortless. You may notice that your breathing slows, that your body relaxes without instruction, that thoughts pass through more loosely. These are signs that awareness is taking the lead. At this point, meaning no longer arrives as explanation. It arrives as alignment. You may not be able to articulate what shifted, but you feel oriented differently, less scattered, less compelled, more certain without needing reasons. This is the hallmark of true listening. The listener does not chase insight. Insight arrives because the listener is available. This is why nothing here needs to be memorized. Nothing needs to be repeated perfectly. Nothing needs to be believed. If you are listening rather than hearing, the transmission will integrate on its own timeline. And once integrated, it expresses naturally through action, speech, and choice, without conscious effort. You will know you are listening when you stop waiting for something to happen, when the need for confirmation fades, when curiosity replaces urgency, when the experience itself feels complete, even without conclusions. This is not the mind's understanding, it is awareness recognizing itself. Remain here, not straining, not searching, just listening. Because what you are receiving now is not meant to be heard. It is meant to be allowed. Chapter 5. The nervous system remembers first. Before the mind understands, the body knows. This is not metaphor, it is design. Long before language formed thoughts, the nervous system learned how to listen. It learned through sensation, rhythm, and pattern. It learned to detect safety, threat, coherence, and disruption without words. This intelligence never disappeared. It was simply overshadowed by faster thinking. When something true approaches, the body responds first. You may feel it as a soft settling in the chest, a release you didn't realize you were holding, a subtle warmth, or a quiet alertness that has nothing to do with fear. Sometimes it arrives as a deep breath that happens on its own, as if the body has been waiting for permission to exhale. This is recognition. The nervous system does not care about explanation. It does not debate philosophy. It responds to coherence. When something aligns with reality at a fundamental level, the body relaxes into it. When something contradicts it, tension appears, even if the mind insists otherwise. This is why people can repeat affirmations while their bodies tighten. Why they can say the right words while their stomach knots. The nervous system does not respond to intention. It responds to truth. And truth, at this level, is felt. This is also why change that begins in the body lasts longer than change that begins in the mind. When the nervous system recalibrates, perception follows naturally. But when the mind tries to override the body, exhaustion sets in. What you are hearing now is not aimed at your beliefs, it is aimed beneath them. As you listen, the nervous system is scanning, not for meaning, but for safety and coherence. If it senses threat, it contracts. If it senses alignment, it opens. This opening is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost unnoticeable unless you are paying attention. But once it happens, everything else changes. A regulated nervous system allows awareness to widen. Curiosity replaces vigilance. Presence becomes possible. You stop bracing for impact and start receiving information that was always there but previously filtered out. This is why rushing insight backfires. Speed signals danger. Urgency tells the body something is wrong. Slowness, on the other hand, communicates safety, and safety is the prerequisite for integration. The ancients knew this without neuroscience. They structured rituals around rhythm, breath, and stillness because these are the languages the nervous system understands. They did not explain truths first. They prepared the body to receive them. Modern life reversed this order. It floods the mind with concepts while the body remains in a constant low-grade state of alarm. The result is information without integration, knowledge without embodiment. But embodiment is where transformation happens. When the nervous system remembers safety, identity loosens. The body no longer needs to defend a fixed self. It becomes adaptable, fluid, receptive. In this state, perception reorganizes without force. You may notice that certain thoughts no longer feel convincing, not because you argued with them, but because the body stopped supporting them. Fear loses credibility when the nervous system is calm. Scarcity loses urgency. Old narratives weaken. This is not suppression. It is repatterning. The nervous system learns by repetition, not persuasion. Each moment of calm presence teaches it that the environment is safe enough to soften. Each breath taken without rush reinforces this lesson. Over time, the baseline shifts. And when the baseline shifts, reality responds differently. This is why listening in this state matters. The words are not the primary influence. The experience of listening, unhurried, unthreatened, open, is what recalibrates the system. The message is carried in the pacing, the pauses, the lack of demand. Nothing here is trying to convince you. That alone is calming. If at any point you feel your body relax, that is the work happening. If you feel your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench, your breathing deepen, notice it. Do not analyze it. Just let it be. This noticing strengthens the loop between awareness and regulation. Over time, the nervous system begins to associate awareness itself with safety. This is profound. It means you can be present without bracing, that you can observe without tension, that you can exist without constant self-monitoring. In this state, intuition sharpens. Not because you are trying to be intuitive, but because the noise of vigilance has quieted. Signals that were always present become perceptible. The body remembers how to listen, and when it does, the mind follows. So allow this process to be physical. Let it happen beneath thought. Trust the intelligence that kept you alive long before you learned how to explain yourself. You do not need to force understanding. Your nervous system is already ahead of you. Let it lead. Because when the body feels safe enough to listen, truth no longer needs to knock. It is already inside. Chapter 6. The Gate That Opens Only When You Stop Trying. There is a moment in every genuine shift when effort becomes the obstacle. Not because effort is wrong, but because it has done all it can do. Beyond that point, pushing no longer creates movement. It creates resistance. Most people are taught that progress requires strain, that transformation demands force, that if something is not working, the solution is to try harder. This belief is reinforced so early and so often that it becomes invisible, woven into identity itself. But there are gates in reality that do not respond to pressure. They are not locked, they are sensitive. These gates open only when the body softens, when the mind releases its grip, when the nervous system stops signaling urgency. They open when striving dissolves into availability. This is why people often experience breakthroughs after giving up, not in despair, but in exhaustion. When the last strategy collapses, something else finally has space to move. The mind interprets this as failure. Reality interprets it as readiness. Trying creates a subtle contraction. Even when the intention is positive, effort carries the message that something is missing, that the present moment is insufficient, that arrival is somewhere else. This message is received not only by the psyche, but by the nervous system and the environment itself. Reality responds to state, not desire. When you try, you are oriented toward lack. When you allow, you are oriented toward presence. Presence does not need to demand. It attracts through coherence. This does not mean inaction. It means aligned action. Aligned action feels different. It does not rush. It does not force outcomes. It moves with a sense of inevitability rather than urgency. You act because it feels natural, not because you are afraid of what will happen if you do not. The gate responds to this difference immediately. You may notice that when you stop trying to understand, clarity appears. When you stop trying to control timing, events align. When you stop trying to be ready, readiness arrives. This is not coincidence. It is the nature of systems that self-organize. Think of how sleep arrives. The more you try to fall asleep, the more elusive it becomes. Sleep comes when you stop chasing it, when the body feels safe enough to let go, when vigilance relaxes. The gate works the same way. It does not reward effort, it responds to trust. Trust here is not belief in a future outcome. It is comfort in the present moment. It is the absence of internal pressure. It is the quiet assumption that nothing essential is missing right now. This assumption changes everything. When the internal environment shifts from striving to sufficiency, the external environment recalibrates. Opportunities appear without being hunted. Solutions emerge without being forced. Conversations unfold with unexpected ease. The gate was never closed. You were pushing on the wrong side. This is difficult to accept because it contradicts the identity built around effort. Many people do not know who they are without striving. They equate effort with worth, busyness with value, struggle with legitimacy, but the gate does not respond to worthiness. It responds to alignment. Alignment is effortless not because it is passive, but because it is precise. It removes wasted movement. It eliminates friction. It allows energy to move where it is naturally inclined. You may feel a subtle fear here, a concern that if you stop trying, everything will fall apart, that momentum will be lost, that you will miss something important. This fear is part of the gate. It is the final contraction that must soften. When you stop trying, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are abandoning the illusion that force is the source of change. You are allowing intelligence beyond your personal strategies to participate. This intelligence has always been present. It simply could not reach you through tension. Once effort releases, signals become clearer. Intuition sharpens. Timing improves. You begin to sense when to act and when to wait, not through calculation, but through feel. This is the intelligence of life itself, responding to openness. The gate opens quietly. There is no fanfare, no announcement. Often you only realize you have passed through when you notice how different things feel. Less heavy, less strained, more fluid. You did not do anything. You stopped doing what was unnecessary. This is why listening at this level matters. If you are still trying to get something from this, the gate remains invisible. If you allow the experience to unfold without grasping, you may find that something has already shifted. So let effort rest here, not forever, just long enough. Notice what happens when you stop reaching. When you stop leaning forward, when you let the moment hold you instead. This is where the gate responds, not to force, not to demand, but to the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are already standing in the doorway. Chapter 7. The Lie of Linear Time. Time is the most convincing illusion ever sustained, not because it is false in function, but because it is mistaken for structure rather than tool. You were taught that time moves forward in a straight line, past behind you, future ahead, present as a fleeting point you are always about to lose. This idea shapes nearly every decision you make, often without question. You hurry because time is running out. You delay because the moment is not yet right. You regret because something is over. You hope because something is coming. But this version of time is not how reality actually operates. It is how the mind organizes experience. Linear time is a convenience, not a law. At the deeper level where reality organizes itself, time behaves very differently. It compresses, It stretches. It folds back on itself. It responds to state rather than sequence. This is why moments of danger feel slow, why joy makes hours vanish, why deep presence dissolves the sense of time altogether. These are not glitches, they are clues. When awareness changes, time follows. You may have noticed that some events seem inevitable in retrospect, as if they were always going to happen, regardless of the steps taken. Others dissolve without explanation, even after careful planning. This is because outcomes are not produced by time alone. They are selected through alignment. The future is not ahead of you. It is around you. It exists as a field of possibilities, all available now, waiting for resonance. What you call waiting is often just misalignment. What you call delay is often a mismatch between internal state and external conditions. Nothing is late, nothing is early. Things arrive when coherence is established. This is difficult for the mind to accept because the mind depends on sequence. It wants causes to precede effects. It wants effort to lead to reward. It wants time to justify struggle. But reality does not require justification. It requires congruence. When congruence is present, time collapses. You may experience this as sudden change, a realization that arrives fully formed, a shift that seems instantaneous, an opportunity that appears without build-up. These moments feel miraculous only because the preparation happened outside linear awareness. You did not slowly become ready. Readiness assembled quietly. The lie of linear time keeps people stuck in preparation loops. They believe they must become someone else first, then life will respond. They wait for confidence before acting, clarity before moving, permission before choosing. But these qualities do not arrive through waiting. They arrive through engagement with the present moment. The present is not a bridge between past and future. It is the point of selection. In this moment, countless timelines are available. Some feel heavy, some feel light, some feel constrained, some feel expansive. You step into them not by force, but by attention. What you attend to gains solidity. What you disengage from loses momentum. This is why worry feels productive, but changes nothing. It invests attention in undesirable futures, giving them weight. This is why hope without presence feels empty. It projects energy forward without anchoring it now. The present moment is where energy becomes instruction. When you are fully here, not rushing, not resisting, your nervous system stabilizes, your perception sharpens, your responses become precise. In this state, your actions carry disproportionate impact. Small choices create large effects, not because of effort, but because of timing. Timing is not measured, it is sensed. This is why intuition does not operate on schedules. It moves when the field is open. Sometimes that means immediate action. Sometimes it means stillness. Both are equally powerful when aligned. Linear time says, if you miss this, it's gone. Reality says, if it's aligned, it returns. What is truly yours does not require urgency. Urgency is a signal of fear, not opportunity. When something is meant to integrate, it waits for coherence. It does not punish hesitation. It dissolves only when the lesson has been absorbed or the alignment no longer exists. This understanding changes how you relate to the past as well. The past is not fixed. Its emotional charge shifts as your present state shifts. Memories reorganize themselves around current identity. Events that once felt heavy lose their grip. Others reveal meaning that was invisible at the time. This is not rewriting history. It is updating interpretation. The future behaves the same way. It reorganizes around who you are now, not who you plan to become, not who you hope to be, who you are being in this moment. This is why deep change often feels anticlimactic. There is no dramatic passage of time, just a quiet realization that something no longer applies. A story drops, a fear loses relevance, a desire shifts shape. Time did not heal it, presence did. Midnight again plays a role here. At this hour, the grip of linear narrative loosens. The mind is less invested in continuity. Identity softens. You are no longer defined by what you did earlier or what you must do next. You hover in between. In this hovering, the illusion of linear time thins. This is where selection happens most easily, not through decision, but through resonance. You feel drawn toward what fits. You drift away from what doesn't. No explanation required. When you listen from this place, you are not asking, how long will this take? You are asking, is this true now? And that question is far more powerful, because truth does not unfold in steps. It arrives whole. Once you see through the lie of linear time, patience changes meaning. It is no longer waiting for something to happen. It is allowing alignment to assemble. Action changes too. It is no longer frantic. It is timely. You begin to trust that nothing essential is missed, that what matters finds you when you are oriented correctly. That effort cannot replace presence, and speed cannot replace coherence. Time stops being an enemy. It becomes an instrument, used gently, precisely, in service of awareness. And from this place, the future no longer feels distant. It feels available, now. Chapter 8. The Role of Secrecy. There is a misunderstanding about secrecy that has persisted for centuries. Most people assume secrecy exists to exclude, to hoard, to create advantage. They imagine hidden knowledge as something guarded by power, protected by walls, kept away from the unworthy. But the secrecy that matters here has nothing to do with exclusion. It exists for preservation. Certain truths lose their potency when exposed too early, not because they are fragile, but because they are unfinished when first encountered. Like a seed pulled from soil before it has rooted, they cannot survive the shock of explanation, judgment, or debate. Secrecy is not concealment. It is incubation. When something meaningful first enters awareness, it arrives quietly. It does not come with language attached. It arrives as sensation, intuition, or subtle reorientation. At this stage, it is alive but undefined. It needs stillness, not scrutiny. The moment you speak it too soon, you externalize it. You pull it into the social field where it must be justified, defended, or interpreted. And in doing so, you shift its center of gravity away from experience and into concept. Concepts are easier to share. They are also easier to dilute. This is why the most transformative realizations often resist language at first, not because they are vague, but because they are pre-verbal. They reorganize perception before they organize thought. To name them prematurely is to flatten them into something smaller than they are. The ancients understood this intuitively. They did not speak of everything they knew. They demonstrated. They embodied. They allowed understanding to ripen naturally in those who were ready. Words were used sparingly. Silence was trusted deeply. Secrecy protected not the knowledge, but the knower. When something true begins to take root in you, your identity starts to shift. Subtle loyalties dissolve. Old motivations lose force. New values emerge quietly. This process is delicate. External interference, opinions, skepticism, praise, misunderstanding can destabilize it. This is why sharing too early often leads to doubt. Not because the realization was wrong, but because it had not yet stabilized internally. External reaction becomes louder than internal knowing. Secrecy gives the nervous system time to recalibrate. It allows the body to adjust to a new baseline without having to defend it. It lets awareness settle into a new orientation without performance. This is not about hiding from others. It is about protecting coherence. There is also another layer to secrecy that is rarely acknowledged. Attention alters what it touches. When you expose something to many perspectives, it becomes many things. It fractures into interpretations. It absorbs projections. It loses its original tone. Some truths must remain singular to remain true. This does not mean they are exclusive. It means they are personal before they are collective. They live in the realm of direct experience first. Only later, if ever, do they translate into shared language. This is why some things are meant to be lived, not explained. You may notice that people who speak constantly about transformation often seem unsettled. Their words are plentiful, but their presence is strained. This is not hypocrisy, it is mistiming. They externalized what needed to integrate. Secrecy would have served them. This is also why this audio asks nothing of you. No sharing, no declaration, no affirmation. It does not demand belief or broadcast. It works best when allowed to move quietly through you, rearranging perception without announcement. Power does not announce itself. It stabilizes. The moment you feel the urge to proclaim a realization, pause, not to suppress it, but to ask whether it has finished forming. True integration feels complete without needing witnesses. It carries its own certainty. When something is fully integrated, it expresses naturally, not through explanation, but through behavior, through timing, through choices that feel obvious rather than dramatic. Secrecy is what allows this natural expression to emerge. There is also a protective aspect here that is subtle but important. Not everyone can receive the same information in the same way. Some will distort it through fear, others through ambition, others through projection. This distortion does not affect the truth itself, but it can affect you if you are not yet grounded. Secrecy protects your orientation from being pulled into unnecessary conflict. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. Discernment knows that not every insight needs an audience. Not every realization needs validation. Not every truth needs to be translated. The role of secrecy is not to withhold light, but to prevent glare. Glare blinds. Soft light reveals. You may find that as you integrate what you are hearing, your desire to explain diminishes. You feel less compelled to convince, less interested in debate. This is not withdrawal, it is stability. Stability does not seek reinforcement. When you are aligned, life responds without needing announcement. People notice without being told. Opportunities shift without explanation. The change becomes self-evident. This is the paradox of secrecy. What is protected grows stronger, and what grows strong eventually becomes visible without effort. You do not need to hide what you are becoming. You only need to stop exposing it prematurely. Let what is forming remain internal until it no longer feels fragile. Let it settle into the body. Let it express through lived coherence rather than words. There will come a time when speaking feels natural again, not to explain, but to reflect. When your presence carries what language once tried to convey. Until then, secrecy is not restraint, it is respect. Respect for timing, respect for integration, respect for the intelligence of what is unfolding within you. Some things grow best in the dark, and when they are ready they rise without announcement, rooted, stable, and unmistakably real. Chapter 9. Attention as Currency. Nothing in your life is neutral. Every moment, every object, every thought competes quietly for one resource more valuable than time, money, or effort: your attention. Attention is not passive observation, it is participation. Wherever it rests, reality thickens. Patterns gain weight. Possibilities begin to organize. What you attend to does not merely occupy your mind. It recruits your nervous system, your emotions, and your future. This is why attention is currency. Not metaphorically, functionally. You pay attention the way you spend money, often unconsciously, often reactively, often on things that give little in return. And just like money, where you place it determines what grows. Most people believe they are responding to reality. In truth, they are funding it. Every worry is an investment. Every fixation is a deposit. Every repeated focus is a long-term contract. Reality responds accordingly. This is not about positive thinking. It is about energetic economics. Attention is the mechanism by which potential becomes probability. What you feed becomes familiar. What becomes familiar feels inevitable. What feels inevitable begins to manifest. The mind does not distinguish between useful attention and habitual attention. It follows momentum. Whatever you have been attending to the longest feels the most real, even if it brings no benefit. This is why breaking patterns feels uncomfortable. You are not just changing behavior, you are redirecting currency. The nervous system resists at first because it is accustomed to funding certain outcomes, even painful ones. Familiar suffering often feels safer than unfamiliar peace. Attention also carries quality. It can be tight or open, anxious or curious, scattered or settled. Two people can look at the same situation and invest radically different energy into it. One funds fear, the other funds clarity. The situation responds differently to each. This is why effort without attention fails, and attention without effort succeeds. You can work tirelessly toward an outcome while secretly funding doubt. Or you can take minimal action while funding trust. The second often moves faster. Attention organizes reality more efficiently than force ever could. But here is the subtlety most people miss. Withdrawing attention is just as powerful as placing it. When you stop funding a pattern, it begins to dissolve, not instantly, but inevitably. Systems collapse when their energy supply is cut. This is why certain problems persist despite solutions. Attention keeps them alive. Analysis feeds them. Resistance strengthens them. Even hatred invests in what it claims to oppose. Indifference is not apathy here. It is strategic non-investment. When you withdraw attention from what drains you and redirect it toward what stabilizes you, reality shifts without confrontation. The field reorganizes itself around the new flow. This redirection does not require willpower, it requires awareness. Awareness notices where attention goes automatically. It observes the pull without obeying it. Over time, this observation weakens the habit. The nervous system learns that it does not have to chase every stimulus. This is liberation at the most practical level. Midnight again reveals this clearly. At that hour, attention naturally slows. It is less fragmented. The constant bidding for it decreases. You can feel where it wants to rest when it is not being pulled. Often it rests on what matters. This is why insights arrive late at night. Not because the mind is sharper, but because attention is no longer being auctioned. It becomes available, and what is valuable rises to meet it. You may begin to notice that certain thoughts lose their charge when you stop feeding them. That certain narratives fade when you do not rehearse them. That certain fears evaporate when you refuse to track them. This is not denial, it is divestment. You are not pretending the thought does not exist. You are simply refusing to fund it. Without funding, it cannot sustain itself. Attention is also cumulative. Small daily investments compound. A few minutes of presence each day builds a different internal economy than hours of scattered focus. Over time, this compounds into clarity, stability, and timing that appears effortless from the outside. Others may call it luck. You will recognize it as alignment. When attention is clean, intuition strengthens. Decisions simplify. You no longer feel pulled in multiple directions. Life begins to feel responsive rather than overwhelming. This is not because life changed, it is because your currency did. You may wonder what deserves attention. This is the wrong question. The better question is, what returns coherence when I attend to it? Coherence feels like settling, like alignment, like the body saying yes without explanation. It does not excite you into frenzy, it calms you into clarity. Fund that. Over time, your reality will reflect your investments with mathematical precision. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but always faithfully. Attention does not judge, it multiplies. This is why the role of secrecy returns here. Broadcasting your attention scatters it. Explaining dilutes it. Arguing redirects it. Silence preserves its potency. You do not need to announce where your attention is going. You need to place it deliberately. As you continue listening, notice where your attention rests naturally. Does it tighten or does it open? Does it scatter or does it gather? This noticing itself is a redirection. You are learning to become an investor rather than a consumer of experience. And like any skilled investor, you will discover that the greatest returns come not from chasing every opportunity, but from knowing when to hold, when to withdraw, and when to let compounding do the work. Your attention is already shaping your future. The only question is whether you are spending it consciously or letting it be spent for you. Chapter 10. The threshold feeling. There is a sensation that appears just before change, so subtle it is often mistaken for uncertainty. It does not announce itself as certainty or excitement. It arrives quietly as a pause in momentum, a slight loosening of the familiar grip. This is the threshold feeling. Most people misinterpret it. They think something is wrong, that motivation has faded, that clarity has been lost. They rush to correct it, to reignite effort, to restore urgency. In doing so, they step back from the very doorway they were approaching. The threshold feeling is not confusion, it is suspension. It arises when an old orientation has exhausted itself, but the new one has not yet solidified. The mind dislikes this space because it cannot categorize it. The nervous system senses unfamiliarity and asks for reassurance. But beneath both reactions, something precise is happening. Reality is reorganizing. Just before a significant internal shift, patterns loosen. Certainties soften. The strategies that once worked lose their edge. This is not regression. It is release. The system is making room. Think of how the body prepares to sleep. There is a moment when alertness fades, but rest has not yet arrived. Thoughts drift. Muscles relax unevenly. Breathing changes. If you interfere, check your phone, force focus, demand clarity. You interrupt the transition. The threshold feeling works the same way. It is the body and awareness preparing to move from one configuration to another. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. This is why the threshold often feels like stillness mixed with anticipation. Not excitement, but readiness. Not fear, but sensitivity. You may feel less interested in noise, less compelled to explain yourself, less driven to prove anything. This withdrawal is not apathy, it is recalibration. At the threshold, attention naturally turns inward, not to analyze, but to sense. The body becomes more communicative. Intuition grows louder. Subtle cues carry more weight. You begin to feel when something fits and when it doesn't, without needing justification. This is also why the threshold is fragile. External pressure can pull you back into old patterns. Well-meaning advice can sound like noise. Familiar obligations can feel heavier than before. This is not because they are wrong, but because they belong to an orientation that is loosening. Crossing a threshold requires restraint. Not the restraint of suppression, but the restraint of patience. Of letting the new shape emerge without grabbing at it. Of allowing ambiguity without rushing to resolve it. The mind wants conclusions. The threshold wants presence. If you stay with the sensation without naming it, something stabilizes. The unfamiliar becomes navigable. The pause reveals direction. Often, the next step appears obvious, not because it was explained, but because resistance has dropped. This is the moment when timing becomes visible. You may notice that certain actions suddenly feel effortless, that conversations align without planning, that opportunities appear without pursuit. This is not luck. It is resonance. You have crossed into a configuration where the environment responds differently, but the crossing itself is quiet. No announcement marks it. No dramatic shift confirms it. Often, you only realize later that something fundamental changed. That what once felt heavy no longer does. That what once required effort now flows. The threshold feeling passed, and you are standing on the other side. This is why many people miss it. They mistake the pause for a problem. They treat sensitivity as weakness. They rush back into effort because effort feels familiar, even when it is no longer effective. But the threshold is not asking for effort. It is asking for trust. Trust not in an outcome, but in the process of reorganization. Trust that not knowing for a moment is not dangerous. Trust that clarity does not always arrive through thought. Trust that the body and awareness are capable of navigating transitions without constant instruction. Midnight amplifies this feeling because it naturally creates liminality. The day has ended. The next has not begun. Identity relaxes. Expectations drop. You are not required to be anyone specific. In this space, the threshold becomes perceptible. If you feel this sensation now, a quiet suspension, a sense of being between, do not push past it. Do not retreat from it. Stay with it gently. Let it inform you without demanding interpretation. This is not the time to decide everything. It is the time to listen. The threshold does not respond to urgency. It responds to attunement. When you are attuned, you move naturally. When you are impatient, you miss the opening. This is also why the threshold often appears repeatedly before a major shift. It is not a single doorway, but a narrowing. Each time you allow it, the old configuration loosens further. Each time you resist, it tightens again. Eventually, the crossing becomes unavoidable, not through force, but through inevitability. You will know you have crossed when effort drops away. When you stop trying to convince yourself. When action arises without internal debate. when the next step feels obvious rather than impressive. This is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of a different mode of movement, a mode where you respond rather than pursue, where timing guides more than planning, where alignment replaces ambition. The threshold feeling is not something to overcome. It is something to recognize. It is the quiet signal that you are close, that the old shape is dissolving, that the new one is assembling. Stand here without hurry, because thresholds do not open to force. They open to those who are willing to pause long enough to notice they are already standing in the doorway. Chapter 11. The Quiet Rewiring. Most transformation is invisible while it is happening. This is why people often believe nothing is changing until everything has already changed. The mind expects progress to announce itself. It looks for signs, milestones, evidence. But the deepest shifts do not arrive with clarity or confirmation. They occur beneath awareness, in the subtle reconfiguration of perception, emotion, and response. This is the quiet rewiring. It begins not with revelation, but with a soft disruption. Old reactions weaken. Familiar patterns feel less convincing. You notice a pause where a reflex once lived. In that pause, choice appears, not as effort, but as space. This is how rewiring happens. The nervous system, having sensed safety and coherence, begins to update its assumptions. It releases outdated threat responses. It recalibrates expectation. What once felt urgent now feels optional. What once felt impossible now feels neutral. Neutrality is important here. People often chase positive states, believing transformation must feel uplifting or euphoric. But neutrality is where rewiring stabilizes. It is the state in which old emotional charges lose their grip without being replaced by forced optimism. Neutrality allows clarity. When emotional extremes fade, perception sharpens. You see situations as they are, not as your past trained you to interpret them. This is not detachment, it is accuracy. The quiet rewiring does not change your personality, it changes your baseline. Your baseline determines how you interpret events before thought intervenes. It decides whether you brace or relax, resist or engage, withdraw or respond. When the baseline shifts, life feels different even when circumstances remain the same. This is why people sometimes say, "Nothing changed, but everything feels different." They are describing a baseline shift. This shift cannot be forced. It emerges through repeated experiences of presence without threat, through moments when awareness remains open instead of contracting, through listening without demand. Each of these moments teaches the system that it does not need to protect itself as aggressively. Over time, protection gives way to participation. This is also why the rewiring feels slow until it is sudden. The system updates incrementally, but expression happens all at once, like ice warming imperceptibly until it melts. The mind often resists this phase. It feels unproductive. It asks, "What am I supposed to do?" It wants instructions, tasks, reassurance. But the quiet rewiring does not respond to direction. It responds to allowance. Doing less is often required, not in action, but in interference. The less you interfere with the process by demanding outcomes, the more efficiently it completes itself. This is counterintuitive, especially for those conditioned to equate effort with value. But rewiring is not effort-based. It is exposure-based. Exposure to presence. Exposure to stillness. Exposure to moments where nothing bad happens when you stop controlling. These exposures accumulate. You may notice that situations that once triggered anxiety now pass without reaction. That conversations that once drained you no longer hold the same power. That decisions feel simpler, not because options disappeared, but because clarity emerged. This clarity is not intellectual, it is somatic. The body responds first. You feel steadier, more grounded, less reactive. Only later does the mind catch up and begin to narrate what has already changed. This lag is normal. The rewiring happens beneath language. When language tries to lead, it often disrupts. This is why secrecy remains important here. Speaking too much during this phase can pull attention back into analysis, slowing integration. Let the change settle. There is also a subtle grief that can accompany rewiring. Not sadness, but a quiet recognition that certain identities no longer apply. Ways of being that once defined you begin to fade. This can feel disorienting if you are attached to them, but this fading is not loss. It is release. You are not becoming less. You are becoming less burdened. As the system rewires, you may feel drawn to simplicity, less stimulation, fewer explanations, more direct experience. This is not withdrawal, it is refinement. Refinement removes what is unnecessary, so what is essential can function without obstruction. You may also notice changes in timing. You act later than you used to, but with better results. You speak less, but more precisely. You rest more, but feel more effective. This is efficiency born of alignment. The quiet rewiring also affects how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of triggering anxiety, uncertainty becomes tolerable, even interesting. You no longer need immediate answers. You trust that clarity will arrive when the system is ready to use it. This trust is not blind, it is experiential. You have felt the difference between forcing and allowing, between urgency and timing, between reaction and response. These experiences build confidence that does not rely on belief, confidence that comes from stability. Eventually, you may realize that you are no longer trying to change yourself. The desire to fix or improve softens. Not because you are complacent, but because you are no longer oriented toward deficiency. You are no longer becoming. You are unfolding. The quiet rewiring completes itself not when you understand it, but when you stop monitoring it, when you forget to check progress, when life simply feels navigable. This is the sign of integration. From here, action arises naturally, not as ambition, but as expression. You do what fits, you avoid what doesn't. There is less inner conflict because the system is no longer divided against itself. The rewiring has aligned the parts. This alignment does not make life perfect. It makes it coherent. And coherence is the foundation of resilience, clarity, and ease. If you are in this phase now, trust its subtlety. Do not rush it. Do not dramatize it. Let it complete itself in its own time. Because when the quiet rewiring finishes, you will not feel transformed. You will feel normal, in a way that feels more true than anything you have known before. Chapter 12. Identity as a temporary arrangement. Identity feels solid only because it has been rehearsed. Repeated long enough, any pattern convinces the mind it is permanent. But permanence was never the nature of identity. It was convenience. Identity is a working model, a provisional structure. A temporary arrangement consciousness uses to navigate experience. From early life, identity forms around what is required. You learn who to be based on what keeps you safe, accepted, oriented. Traits are adopted not because they are true, but because they are useful. Over time, usefulness masquerades as essence. I am this kind of person. I am not that kind of person. I always react this way. I could never do that. These statements feel factual, but they are historical. They describe patterns, not truth. They reflect conditioning, not inevitability. Identity is not who you are. It is how you adapted. This is why identity shifts under pressure, why crisis changes people, why grief dissolves priorities, why moments of deep presence make the self feel porous. When circumstances change, the arrangement updates. But most people resist this updating. They cling to identity because it provides continuity. It answers the question, who am I, quickly enough to avoid discomfort. Yet the discomfort is the doorway. When identity loosens, something quieter becomes available. Awareness without label, presence without story, action without self-reference. This state feels unfamiliar at first because it does not reinforce the narrative of me, but it feels real. The quiet rewiring you have been experiencing begins to destabilize identity not through attack, but through irrelevance. Old labels no longer fit. Old motivations no longer drive. Old fears lose their authority. This can feel unsettling if you are attached to knowing who you are. But identity was never meant to be known. It was meant to be used, then released. Think of identity as clothing, necessary in certain conditions, restrictive in others. You would not wear winter gear in summer, nor swim in heavy fabric. Yet many people wear the same identity in every season of life and wonder why movement feels difficult. The problem is not the clothing, it is the refusal to change. When identity becomes rigid, awareness contracts, possibility narrows. You stop seeing what is available because you are busy maintaining who you think you are. This is why transformation often begins with the sentence, "I don't know who I am anymore." It sounds like loss, but it is actually spaciousness. Not knowing creates room. In this room, you can respond freshly rather than habitually. You can choose based on fit rather than consistency. You can act without consulting a narrative. This does not erase your past. It frees you from being governed by it. Identity dissolves not in chaos, but in clarity. When you see that a trait is optional, you stop defending it. When you see that a role was adaptive rather than essential, you release it without resentment. This is not rejection of self, it is recognition of flexibility. You may notice that certain descriptors no longer feel accurate. Anxious, driven, shy, responsible, broken. These words once organized experience. Now they feel heavy, imprecise. This is a sign of evolution. As identity loosens, presence strengthens. You are no longer filtering every moment through, "Who am I supposed to be?" You simply meet what is happening as it happens. From this place, action becomes situational rather than personal. You respond based on what the moment requires, not what the identity demands. This is freedom without rebellion. There is also a subtle grief here. When identity shifts, you may mourn versions of yourself that once felt necessary. Not because they were wrong, but because they carried you through phases that are complete. Honor them, then release them. Holding on to identity past its usefulness is like insisting on speaking a language you no longer live inside. It creates friction where none is needed. The deeper truth is this: awareness does not require identity to function. Identity is a convenience layer, not the operating system. When it falls away, awareness does not disappear. It becomes clearer. This clarity is not emptiness, it is responsiveness. You may find that you no longer need to define yourself in conversation, that you speak less about who you are and more from where you are. This shift is subtle but powerful. People feel it, not because you announce it, but because coherence is palpable. There is less performance, less self-monitoring, less need to be consistent. Consistency is replaced by congruence. Congruence responds to reality. Consistency defends identity. The transition between the two can feel like standing without a script. But it is precisely here that authenticity emerges, not as a trait, but as alignment. This is why the listener matters more than the hearer, why presence matters more than belief, why secrecy matters during integration. Identity wants to speak. Awareness wants to settle. Let it settle. You do not need to decide who you are. You do not need to update your story. You do not need to replace one identity with a better one. Simply allow identity to become lighter. Wear it when useful, set it down when not. This flexibility is not fragmentation, it is maturity. And as identity becomes a temporary arrangement rather than a fixed structure, life responds with greater ease. You move where you are needed. You stop forcing roles. You stop resisting change. You begin to trust that who you need to be will emerge naturally from the moment, without planning or defense. This trust is not passive, it is grounded. Grounded in the recognition that awareness remains constant even as identity shifts. That you are not disappearing when roles dissolve, you are becoming available. Available to reality as it is. And in this availability, you discover something quietly profound. You were never meant to be someone. You were meant to be here. Chapter 13. The Observer That Was Never Asleep. There is a part of you that has never been confused. It has never panicked. It has never needed reassurance. While thoughts raced, emotions surged, identities formed and dissolved, this part remained unchanged, quiet, steady, watching. This is the observer, not the thinker, not the narrator, not the personality. The observer is the awareness in which all of those appear. Most people live as if they are inside their thoughts, pulled along by each reaction, believing every story the mind produces. But the moment you notice a thought, something extraordinary is revealed. You cannot be the thought if you can observe it. Observation implies distance. Distance implies presence. The observer is not something you create. It is what notices creation. It is not developed through effort. It is uncovered through recognition. You have accessed it before, even if you did not name it. In moments of awe, when time seemed to stop. In moments of grief, when everything fell silent. In moments of deep focus, when self-consciousness disappeared. In those moments, the observer stepped forward, not dramatically, but naturally. It did not comment, it did not judge, it simply was. The observer does not sleep, it is only overlooked. The mind is loud and convincing. It narrates constantly, interpreting experience, labeling sensations, predicting outcomes. Over time, this narration becomes so familiar that it feels like me. But narration is activity. The observer is stillness. When you mistake activity for identity, life feels overwhelming. You feel trapped inside reactions, carried by emotions, pressured by thoughts. But when the observer is recognized, something shifts immediately. You gain space, not emotional distance, but perceptual space. You see thoughts arise rather than being consumed by them. You feel emotions move rather than being defined by them. You notice impulses without obeying them. This noticing does not suppress experience. It contextualizes it. The observer does not eliminate pain or difficulty. It changes your relationship to them. Pain becomes sensation rather than identity. Difficulty becomes information rather than threat. This shift is subtle, but it is foundational. The observer is not detached in the sense of numbness. It is deeply present, more present than the mind could ever be. It receives experience fully without collapsing into it. This is why presence feels grounding. It is the observer recognizing itself. You may notice that when you rest as the observer, the nervous system calms, breathing deepens, thoughts slow without force, the body feels safer. This is not coincidence. The observer is non-threatening by nature. It does not rush or demand, it allows. Allowance communicates safety. The observer also has no agenda. It does not seek outcomes. It does not need the moment to be different. This neutrality is powerful. When there is no internal resistance, experience flows more freely. This does not mean passivity. It means clarity. From the observer's perspective, action arises more cleanly. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than default. The system is no longer hijacked by habit. This is why becoming the observer is not an escape from life. It is an entrance into it. The observer does not live in abstraction. It lives in sensation, breath, sound, movement. It is here, now, always accessible. Not through effort, but through attention. You do not need to become the observer. You need to stop overlooking it. One simple way to recognize it is this. Notice that you are aware, not of something specific, just aware. That awareness has no shape, no age, no opinion. It is simply present. That presence has been with you since before memory. It watched childhood form. It watched beliefs accumulate. It watched identities assemble. And it remains unchanged. This is why the observer feels familiar when recognized. It is not new. It is remembered. The mind may resist this recognition. It may try to analyze it, claim it, or dismiss it. But analysis occurs within awareness. Dismissal occurs within awareness. Resistance occurs within awareness. Awareness itself remains untouched. This is the quiet paradox. The observer cannot be found as an object because it is the subject. You cannot see it the way you see a thought. You can only be it. And when you do, even briefly, the center of gravity shifts. Life no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening in you. This distinction changes everything. You stop taking thoughts personally. You stop fearing emotions as threats. You stop clinging to identities for stability. Stability is found elsewhere. The observer is stable not because it resists change, but because it does not depend on form. Thoughts change, emotions change, circumstances change. The observer remains. This does not make life flat. It makes it navigable. From here, you can engage fully without being consumed. You can care deeply without being destabilized. You can experience intensity without losing orientation. This is what sages meant by freedom. Not freedom from experience, but freedom within experience. The observer does not remove you from the world. It roots you in it. As you continue listening, notice the simple fact that awareness is already here. You do not need to summon it. It is listening right now. Thoughts may come and go. Feelings may rise and fall. Words may resonate or pass, but the observer remains, quiet, present, unmoved. It has been with you through every chapter of your life. It will be with you through every change ahead. And the more you recognize it, the less you will feel lost, because you will no longer be searching for yourself in what is temporary. You will be resting in what has never been asleep. Chapter 14. Emotional Gravity. Emotions are not obstacles to be overcome. They are forces, subtle, persistent, and directional. Like gravity, they do not announce themselves. You do not feel them as commands. You feel them as pulls towards certain thoughts, towards certain behaviors, towards certain futures that seem to repeat themselves with uncanny consistency. Most people believe emotions are reactions to circumstances, that life happens first and feelings follow. But this sequence is reversed more often than anyone realizes. Emotions shape perception, perception shapes interpretation, and interpretation selects experience. Emotion is not the result, it is the field. This is emotional gravity. Every emotional state carries weight. Some are dense, pulling attention inward and downward. Fear, shame, resentment, despair. Others are lighter, expansive, curiosity, peace, gratitude, clarity. These states are not moral categories. They are energetic orientations. Gravity does not punish, it organizes. When you remain in a particular emotional field long enough, life arranges itself around it. Thoughts that match it feel believable. Memories that support it surface easily. Opportunities that contradict it remain invisible or feel inaccessible. This is why patterns repeat, not because you are broken, but because gravity is consistent. The mistake most people make is trying to escape emotional gravity through force. They attempt to think positively while feeling heavy. They suppress discomfort while their body signals contraction. This creates internal conflict. One part pulling upward, another anchoring downward. Conflict drains energy. Emotional gravity does not respond to denial, it responds to acknowledgement. When you allow yourself to feel an emotion without resistance, its grip often loosens. Not because you indulged it, but because you removed the tension that was holding it in place. Resistance adds weight. Allowance reduces it. This does not mean drowning in emotion. It means feeling without becoming. The observer you discovered in the previous chapter is essential here. From the observer's position, emotions can be felt fully without defining you. They move through awareness like weather through the sky. Intense at times, temporary always. When emotions are allowed to move, they complete their cycle. When they are resisted, they stagnate. Stagnation creates density. Density increases gravity. This is why unprocessed emotions feel heavy. They are incomplete movements. Emotional gravity also explains why sudden shifts can feel destabilizing. When the emotional field changes, the internal sense of up and down recalibrates. What once felt familiar no longer does. What once felt impossible may suddenly feel reachable. This disorientation is not loss of direction. It is change of orientation. You may notice this when you feel inexplicably lighter one day. Problems that once dominated your thinking lose relevance. Solutions appear obvious. The same circumstances exist, but they do not weigh the same. Gravity has shifted. This shift rarely happens through argument or affirmation. It happens through experience, often subtle, often quiet. A moment of safety, a moment of being seen, a moment of rest. These moments alter the emotional field. Over time, these moments accumulate. This is why emotional regulation is more powerful than emotional control. Regulation allows movement, control suppresses it. Regulation works with gravity, control fights it. You regulate emotion by staying present without judgment, by breathing through sensation, by letting emotion inform without dictate. This requires patience. Emotional gravity changes slowly at first, then suddenly. Like a planet adjusting its orbit, the shift is gradual until a new path locks in. Once it does, life feels different. Not because it is different, but because the pull has changed. You are no longer dragged back into the same loops. You do not fall into the same interpretations. You do not react with the same intensity. This is freedom without suppression. You may wonder whether certain emotions should be avoided. This is the wrong framing. No emotion is wrong, but not every emotion needs to be lived from. Feeling is not the same as following. You can feel fear without obeying it. You can feel anger without acting it out. You can feel sadness without becoming it. This distinction weakens emotional gravity. The body plays a crucial role here. Emotions live in sensation, tightness in the chest, heat in the face, weight in the stomach. When you stay with sensation rather than story, emotion moves. Stories anchor emotion, sensation releases it. This is why the nervous system matters so deeply. When the body feels safe enough to feel, emotion completes itself. When the body feels threatened, emotion contracts and loops. Safety allows gravity to shift. Midnight again provides a unique environment for this. The world is quieter. Demands recede. You are less observed. In this stillness, emotions surface more clearly, not to overwhelm, but to be completed. This is why late-night clarity often follows emotional release. Tears, laughter, sighs, all are signs of gravity adjusting. Do not rush this process. Emotional gravity cannot be forced upward. It lightens as trust grows. Trust in the body's ability to process. Trust in awareness to hold experience. Trust that no emotion is permanent. As gravity shifts, behavior follows naturally. You do not need to try to act differently. You act differently because the pull is different. What once required effort now feels natural. What once felt inevitable loses its hold. This is alignment at the emotional level. You are not meant to eliminate gravity. You are meant to orient wisely within it. Heavier emotions are signals, not sentences. They point to needs, boundaries, or unfinished movements. Lighter emotions signal coherence, openness, readiness. Both are useful. Neither defines you. As you continue listening, notice your emotional field, not to judge it, just to feel its texture. Is it dense or spacious, contracted or open, heavy or light? This noticing alone begins the shift, because gravity responds to awareness, and when awareness remains steady, emotional gravity reorganizes itself, quietly, inevitably, drawing you toward experiences that match your new orientation. Not through force, not through denial, but through the natural physics of feeling allowed to move. Chapter 15. The moment reality listens back. There comes a point when effort stops echoing into silence and begins to meet response. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. This is the moment reality listens back. It does not arrive as confirmation of belief or reward for persistence. It arrives as resonance, as a subtle but undeniable shift in how the world answers your presence. Timing tightens. Friction reduces. Encounters align with unusual precision. You feel it before you can explain it. A conversation unfolds effortlessly. A decision lands without doubt. An obstacle dissolves without confrontation. This is not coincidence. It is reciprocity. Reality is not inert. It is responsive. But it does not respond to demand. It responds to coherence. When your internal signals stabilize, when attention, emotion, and awareness align, the environment reflects that alignment. Listening back does not mean giving you what you want. It means responding to what you are. This distinction is crucial. For much of life, people broadcast mixed signals. They say one thing, feel another, expect a third. Reality cannot respond cleanly to contradiction. The result is delay, distortion, or repetition. Lessons repeat because the signal has not clarified. But when internal noise quiets, the signal strengthens. You are no longer asking from lack. You are expressing from alignment. At this point, reality does not need persuasion. It recognizes the frequency and responds naturally. Opportunities do not need to be chased. Information arrives at the moment it is useful. People appear who speak the language you are now fluent in. This feels magical only because it is rare. Most people interrupt this moment without realizing it. They become excited. They rush to interpret. They seek confirmation. They grasp. And in grasping, they introduce tension back into the signal. Listening back requires steadiness. Think of how echoes work. If you shout into a canyon, the echo is distorted by force. If you speak calmly, the echo is clear. Reality responds the same way. It mirrors the tone, not the content. The moment reality listens back is quiet because clarity does not need volume. You may notice that answers arrive without being sought, that you stop asking certain questions because they no longer feel relevant. That uncertainty transforms into curiosity rather than fear. This is not mastery, it is attunement. Attunement is the state where you are sensitive enough to notice response without demanding it. You listen as much as you speak. You adjust as much as you assert. You participate rather than dominate. In this state, feedback loops shorten. Cause and effect feel closer together, not because time has sped up, but because resistance has decreased. This is why small actions begin to carry weight. A single choice alters direction. A brief pause prevents a long detour. A quiet no opens a wide yes. Reality is listening not because you earned it, but because you are finally speaking clearly. Clear speech here does not mean words, it means state. Your body is relaxed enough to receive. Your emotions are stable enough to guide. Your attention is focused enough to register response. When these align, the conversation becomes mutual. You may experience this as synchronicity, as if life is responding intelligently, as if the environment knows what you are ready for. These impressions are not fantasy. They are perception catching up with function. Reality has always been responsive. You are just now able to hear it. This is why the earlier chapters mattered. The nervous system needed to regulate. Identity needed to loosen. Emotional gravity needed to shift. Attention needed to be reclaimed. Only then could the signal stabilize. Without this foundation, response would feel overwhelming or confusing. With it, response feels natural. The moment reality listens back is not permanent. It is a phase of heightened sensitivity, a window. It requires care, not control. The more gently you move, the more accurately you receive. Do not rush to define it. Do not rush to explain it. Do not rush to use it. Let it teach you how listening works. Notice how reality responds to your internal state more than your effort. Notice how ease produces clarity. Notice how patience produces timing. This noticing refines the signal further. Eventually, the conversation becomes continuous. You no longer wait for signs. You read situations directly. You feel when to move and when to stay. You sense when to speak and when to remain silent. This is not intuition as a special ability. It is intuition as a natural function. You are no longer separate from the feedback loop. You are inside it. This is why power remains quiet here. Loud power disrupts listening. Quiet power maintains it. You stop trying to impress reality and start cooperating with it. Cooperation feels like flow, but it is more precise than that. It is responsiveness without hesitation. If you are experiencing moments where things seem to click without effort, honor them without clinging. Let them pass through. Let them inform rather than inflate. Inflation breaks coherence. Humility preserves it. Humility here is not self-diminishment. It is accuracy. It is knowing that you did not create the responsiveness. You aligned with it. The conversation is older than you. You simply tuned in. As you continue forward, remember this. When reality listens back, it is not offering guarantees. It is offering dialogue. You must continue to listen as much as you act. Listening back is not the end of effort. It is the end of struggle. From here, movement becomes responsive. Decisions become timely. Life becomes navigable rather than overwhelming. And when the dialogue deepens, you may realize something quietly profound. Reality was never silent. You were just learning how to listen in a way it could answer. Chapter 16. What to do before sleep. Sleep is not an ending. It is a passage. Each night, consciousness withdraws from the surface of the world and returns to a deeper current, one that does not think in words or measure time in hours. Here, the mind loosens its grip, identity dissolves into sensation, and the deeper intelligence that shapes experience comes forward. Most people treat this passage casually. They fall into sleep distracted, overstimulated, fragmented. They carry the residue of the day straight into the subconscious, unaware that the final moments before sleep act as instructions. Instructions not to the mind, but to reality itself. What you hold as you fall asleep is not idle. It is formative. It imprints the field from which tomorrow emerges. Not symbolically, but functionally. The subconscious does not distinguish between what is real and what is rehearsed. It accepts the final state as truth and organizes accordingly. This is why nights matter more than mornings. The day is shaped by habit and momentum. Night resets orientation. It is the quiet moment when the system updates its assumptions about the world and your place within it. If you go to sleep tense, the system prepares for threat. If you go to sleep resigned, it prepares for repetition. If you go to sleep open, it prepares for possibility. Preparation happens regardless. The only question is what you prepare for. This is not about affirmations or forcing positivity. Forced states do not imprint deeply. The subconscious listens to coherence, not words. It listens to emotional tone, nervous system regulation, and felt sense. Before sleep, the body becomes the language. This is why rushing into bed with unresolved stimulation disrupts rest. The nervous system remains alert. The system receives mixed signals. It cannot fully descend into restoration. But when you slow deliberately, when you reduce input, soften attention, and allow the day to settle, the system recognizes safety. In safety, integration occurs. Integration is where change happens. The final moments before sleep are not the time to solve problems. They are the time to release them, not by suppression, but by acknowledgement without engagement. You do not need answers before sleep. You need space. Space allows the deeper intelligence to work. This intelligence does not operate through effort. It operates through alignment. When the mind steps aside, it reorganizes patterns, resolves tensions, and prepares responses you could not calculate consciously. You may have experienced this as waking with clarity, or finding that something resolved itself overnight, or feeling different without knowing why. This is not rest alone, it is reconfiguration. What you do before sleep determines whether this reconfiguration works in your favor. Begin by reducing friction, dim lights, slow movement. Let the body know it no longer needs to perform. The more gently you transition, the more deeply the system descends. Then bring attention to state rather than thought. Ask not, what do I want? Ask, what do I feel? Not to analyze, just to notice. If tension is present, let it be present. Do not fight it. Fighting keeps the system awake. Let tension be felt without story. Sensation moves when it is allowed. If emotion surfaces, acknowledge it without judgment. Emotion that is witnessed before sleep often completes itself during the night. This witnessing is enough. Then, choose orientation. Orientation is not a demand. It is a gentle setting of direction, like turning a compass needle, not pushing the needle to a destination. You might orient toward ease, toward trust, toward sufficiency, toward openness, not as goals, but as qualities. Feel them rather than think them. A single sensation of relief is more powerful than 100 words. A single breath that lands deeply in the body tells the subconscious everything it needs to know. You are safe. You are here. Nothing needs to be solved right now. From this state, sleep becomes cooperative rather than forced. The body releases. The mind quiets. Awareness descends. This descent is not unconsciousness. It is a different mode of intelligence, one that does not require your supervision. This is why trying to control dreams or outcomes before sleep backfires. Control signals danger. The system stays alert. Integration stalls. Trust signals permission. When you trust the night to do its work, it does. You may also notice that the final thought before sleep matters less than the final feeling. Thoughts fade quickly. Feeling lingers. The system carries feeling forward. So if you let the final feeling be gentleness, tomorrow inherits gentleness. If you let it be openness, tomorrow inherits openness. This inheritance is subtle but cumulative. Over time, the system learns a new baseline. It begins to expect ease rather than threat. It prepares for responsiveness rather than defense. This expectation shapes perception. You wake differently. Not necessarily happier, but clearer, more available, less reactive. Life responds accordingly. This is not because sleep is magical, it is because sleep is honest. During sleep you cannot pretend, the masks fall away. The system works with what is real. Give it something real to work with. Not ambition, not pressure, not rehearsal of fear. Give it permission. Permission to rest. Permission to release. Permission to not know. This permission is an instruction more powerful than effort. As you drift towards sleep, let awareness soften. Let the day dissolve without review. Let tomorrow remain unimagined. Trust that what needs to be prepared will be prepared. Because the night is not idle. It is where reality listens most closely, not to what you demand, but to what you allow. And when you learn how to enter it deliberately, sleep stops being an escape. It becomes collaboration. Chapter 17. The Dream Gate. Dreams are not stories the mind invents. They are messages the mind is not invited to edit. Each night, as consciousness withdraws from the surface world, another realm becomes accessible. Not imaginary, but internal, symbolic, precise. This realm does not speak in language. It communicates through imagery, sensation, and movement. It bypasses logic and speaks directly to pattern. This is the dream gate. Most people pass through it unconsciously. They enter distracted, fragmented, carrying unresolved noise. As a result, the messages blur. Dreams become chaotic or forgettable. But when the passage is approached deliberately, the gate opens differently. Dreaming becomes functional. The dream gate is not about predicting the future. It is about reorganizing the present. It recalibrates identity, integrates emotion, and adjusts trajectory beneath awareness. This work happens whether you remember your dreams or not. But when you approach the gate consciously, you participate rather than observe from a distance. Participation changes the quality of the exchange. The subconscious does not respond to instruction the way the conscious mind does. It responds to symbolic orientation. It listens to tone, intention, and emotional clarity rather than words. This is why effort fails here, and why subtlety succeeds. Before sleep, when the body has softened and the mind has quieted, the dream gate begins to open. Not suddenly, but gradually. Awareness thins, images flicker, sensations shift. You are no longer fully anchored in the waking world. This is the threshold. If you rush past it, by forcing sleep, replaying the day, or clinging to thought, you pass through the gate without awareness. The subconscious still works, but you do not receive its guidance clearly. But if you pause here, something remarkable happens. You can orient the dream without controlling it. Orientation is not scripting, it is setting context, like choosing a destination without dictating the route. The subconscious understands direction, not demand. For example, holding a gentle sense of curiosity before sleep invites instructive dreams. Holding gratitude invites integrative dreams. Holding fear invites rehearsal dreams. The system practices what it senses will be needed. This is preparation, not punishment. Dreams that repeat are signals. They indicate unfinished integration. Something is looping because it has not yet been resolved at the level of feeling or recognition. When you bring gentle awareness to these patterns, not analysis but presence, they begin to shift. The dream does not need to be solved. It needs to be received. The dream gate opens widest when the ego loosens, when identity relaxes, when the need to be someone dissolves. In this space, symbols are not filtered through narrative. They arrive whole. You may notice dreams that feel more real than waking life, more vivid, more charged. This is not illusion. It is because fewer filters are active. Experience is less mediated. The dream gate is where truth travels freely. This is also why creative insights often arrive through dreams. Art, solutions, realizations, these are not created by effort alone. They emerge from this deeper intelligence. When the conscious mind steps aside, the larger pattern reveals itself. Many cultures understood this and treated dreams as guidance rather than fantasy. Not every image was taken literally, but the emotional tone was honored, the direction was noted. Dreams point, not predict. They reveal what is being processed, what is being prepared, and what is ready to emerge. If you wake from a dream with a lingering feeling, peace, urgency, sadness, clarity, that feeling matters more than the images. The subconscious speaks through affect. Images are the language, but feeling is the message. This is why remembering dreams is less important than remembering how you felt. You may also notice that certain dreams arrive just before major changes. Not as warnings, but as rehearsals. The system practices a new orientation. It simulates possibility. It tests readiness. This is not prophecy, it is calibration. When you approach the dream gate with respect, not curiosity alone, it responds. The exchange deepens. The dreams become clearer, more coherent, more instructive. But respect here does not mean obsession. It means restraint, not chasing meaning, not forcing recall, allowing the dream to do its work without interrogation. The dream gate closes gently upon waking. If you grab at it, it dissolves. If you allow it to fade naturally, its residue remains. That residue informs the day. You may act differently without knowing why. Choose differently without reasoning. Avoid something without fear. Move towards something without justification. This is the dream gate working. Over time, this creates a quiet continuity between night and day. The divide softens. Insight flows more freely. Decisions feel guided rather than forced. You begin to trust that not all intelligence speaks in sentences. As you continue this practice, you may notice that sleep itself deepens. Not longer, but more restorative. The system trusts the night to do its work. It releases more fully. This trust is reciprocal. The dream gate does not open to control. It opens to cooperation. When you let go of the need to manage outcomes, the deeper intelligence steps forward. It handles complexity effortlessly. It integrates what the mind cannot. You are not meant to understand every dream. You are meant to be shaped by them. This shaping is gentle, cumulative, precise. And when you learn to approach the dream gate consciously, without force, without demand, you discover that sleep is not an interruption of life. It is where life quietly reorganizes itself, preparing you for what the waking mind could never plan. Chapter 18. The Invisible Rearrangement. Not all change announces itself. Some of the most significant transformations happen without spectacle, without confirmation, without any clear moment you can point to and say, this is when it happened. This is the invisible rearrangement. It begins quietly, often after you stop trying to change. After effort has softened, after identity has loosened, after attention has settled. Nothing appears different on the surface, yet beneath it, the internal architecture is shifting. Old priorities slide out of alignment. New values take their place without debate. What once mattered loses urgency. What once felt distant feels strangely near. This rearrangement is not driven by will, it is driven by coherence. When the internal system becomes less fragmented, it naturally reorganizes around what fits best. Think of how objects in water slowly drift into new positions when the current changes. There is no struggle, no resistance, just movement responding to flow. The invisible rearrangement works the same way. You may notice that you stop forcing decisions, not because you are indecisive, but because clarity no longer requires pressure. Choices present themselves fully formed, without argument. The internal conflict that once accompanied decision-making fades. This is not passivity, it is resolution. Resolution happens when competing internal signals align. When attention, emotion, and awareness stop pulling in different directions. When the system no longer has to negotiate with itself. From the outside, this can look like stagnation. Others may wonder why you are not rushing, not pushing, not striving. But internally, there is movement, subtle, steady, irreversible. This is why the rearrangement must remain invisible for a time. If exposed too early, the mind interferes. It seeks validation. It questions legitimacy. It tries to measure progress, and measurement collapses subtlety into impatience. The rearrangement requires trust. Trust that movement does not always look like motion. Trust that clarity does not always speak loudly. Trust that preparation can happen without visible effort. You may also notice shifts in how you relate to people. Certain relationships feel complete without conflict. Others deepen without explanation. Some fall away naturally, without drama or resentment. This is not abandonment. It is alignment. The rearrangement brings you into resonance with what matches your current state. Mismatches lose traction. You do not need to reject them. They simply stop engaging. This can feel lonely at first, not because you are alone, but because the familiar has loosened before the new has fully arrived. This is a temporary spaciousness, a clearing. Clearing is not emptiness, it is capacity. The invisible rearrangement creates space for what fits now, not what fit before. It removes furniture without rushing to redecorate. It trusts that the right elements will arrive when the space is ready to receive them. This patience is part of the intelligence at work. You may also experience moments of unexpected ease. Tasks that once drained you take less effort. Conversations flow more naturally. Problems resolve themselves without escalation. These are signs of reduced friction. Friction decreases when internal contradiction dissolves. When you are no longer pushing against yourself, the world responds with less resistance. This does not mean life becomes simple, it becomes navigable. Challenges still arise, but they no longer feel personal. They are addressed directly, without the added weight of identity or fear. You engage with them as situations rather than threats. This shift is subtle but profound. The invisible rearrangement also affects time perception. Waiting feels different. You are less impatient, not because you have resigned yourself, but because urgency has lost its authority. You trust timing without needing to understand it. This trust is not naive, it is embodied. It comes from repeated experience of alignment, of seeing that when you stop forcing, things do not fall apart. They organize. Eventually, you may realize that you are no longer asking the same questions. The questions that once dominated your thinking dissolve. New questions arise, quieter and more precise. Often, the most powerful question becomes simply, what fits now? This question does not demand an answer. It invites awareness. The invisible rearrangement responds to such invitations. You may also notice that creativity increases, not as output, but as perception. You see connections more easily. You recognize patterns without analysis. Solutions appear as recognition rather than invention. This is because the system is no longer cluttered with outdated assumptions. It has room to respond freshly. Do not rush this phase. Many people interrupt the rearrangement by trying to capitalize on it too soon. They seek to use the clarity before it has stabilized. This reintroduces pressure and slows integration. Let the rearrangement finish its work. It finishes when the new orientation feels ordinary, when ease becomes unremarkable, when you stop noticing the difference because it has become the baseline. This is how real change settles. There is no finish line. No announcement, just a quiet sense that you are no longer where you were, and you did not have to push to get here. The invisible rearrangement also prepares you for action. When the internal structure stabilizes, movement becomes inevitable. Opportunities appear because you are now compatible with them. You step forward, not out of ambition, but out of readiness. Readiness feels calm. You act because it makes sense, not because you are proving anything. The action is efficient, well-timed, and proportional. There is no excess. This is the elegance of alignment. As you continue listening, trust that something is already shifting, even if you cannot name it. Trust that the absence of drama is not absence of progress. Trust that the system knows how to reorganize itself when given space, because what is rearranging now is not surface behavior. It is the deeper structure from which all behavior emerges. And once that structure settles, the world you move through will feel subtly, unmistakably different. Not because it changed first, but because you did. Quietly, precisely, from the inside out. Chapter 19. Signs you should not speak about. Not every confirmation is meant to be shared. Some signs arrive only to orient you, not to be explained, proven, or repeated aloud. When reality begins responding with precision, it often communicates through subtle acknowledgments. A phrase overheard at the exact moment a question dissolves, a pattern appearing across unrelated situations. A timing so exact it quiets doubt rather than exciting it. These are not spectacles, they are calibrations. They confirm alignment, not achievement, and alignment does not require witnesses. Most people feel an impulse to speak about these signs immediately, to tell someone, to test whether they are real, to receive validation. This impulse is natural, but it is also premature. Speaking too soon collapses the signal. The moment you externalize a sign, it becomes subject to interpretation, yours and others. Doubt enters. Comparison enters. Narrative enters. What was once direct becomes conceptual, and in becoming conceptual, it loses its function. Signs are instructions, not trophies. They are not meant to elevate identity or strengthen belief. They are meant to guide movement quietly. When used correctly, they adjust timing, refine choices, and confirm direction without drama. This is why secrecy matters again here. Secrecy is not about fear of judgment, it is about maintaining signal integrity. The more a sign is discussed, the more it is diluted. Attention scatters it, language distorts it, explanation pulls it into abstraction. What was precise becomes vague. Think of a compass. Its usefulness lies in accuracy, not display. If you pass it around, debate its markings, question its design, it stops guiding. But if you quietly check it and adjust your path, it fulfills its purpose. Signs function the same way. They are not proof of anything. They are feedback. They tell you whether you are oriented correctly in the moment. They do not promise outcomes. They do not guarantee permanence. They say, continue this way, or pause here, or adjust slightly. That is all. When you begin speaking about them, the mind often tries to assign meaning beyond function. It inflates the sign into destiny, or diminishes it into coincidence. Both extremes remove its usefulness. The sign does not care what you believe. It cares how you respond. This is why restraint is essential. Restraint does not suppress joy or curiosity. It channels them inward. It allows the sign to complete its work without interference. It keeps the communication clean. You may notice that the most powerful signs feel intimate, almost private, as if they were meant for you alone. This is not imagination. It is specificity. The more specific a sign, the less transferable it is. Its meaning depends on your internal state, your timing, your orientation. Another person cannot interpret it for you without distortion. This is why sharing often leads to confusion rather than clarity. There is also another reason silence matters here. When you speak about signs, you shift from listening to performing. You begin to monitor whether they continue. You wait for more. You compare. You measure. This reintroduces demand. Demand disrupts dialogue. Reality listens when you are receptive, not when you are watching it watch you. The conversation works best when it is not self-conscious. Signs often stop appearing when you chase them, not as punishment, but because they are no longer needed. You are either aligned or not. Repetition adds nothing. When alignment stabilizes, signs become unnecessary. Movement becomes obvious. Decisions feel grounded. The system no longer needs to whisper confirmation. This is the paradox. The more you trust signs, the fewer you need. And trust here does not mean belief. It means acting appropriately without hesitation or dramatization. It means adjusting course quietly. It means letting confirmation remain internal. This internalization strengthens coherence. Coherence is fragile during transition. It requires containment. Speaking too much leaks energy. Attention spreads thin. Integration slows. Silence preserves momentum. You may feel a tension between wanting to share and wanting to protect something delicate. Listen to this tension. It is informative. It tells you whether the sign has fully integrated or is still working. When integration completes, sharing feels unnecessary, not forbidden, just irrelevant. The truth has moved from experience into embodiment. It no longer needs words. This is the moment when your behavior changes naturally. When your choices reflect alignment without explanation. When others notice without being told. This is far more convincing than any story. If you find yourself needing to convince someone of a sign, pause. That need is information. It suggests the sign is being used to reinforce belief rather than guide action. Let it guide instead. There will be a time when speaking feels appropriate, when sharing clarifies rather than dilutes, when the insight has stabilized enough to be translated without distortion. That time arrives naturally. Until then, silence is not withholding, it is listening. You are allowing the conversation to continue uninterrupted. You are respecting the precision of the exchange. Reality communicates efficiently. It does not repeat itself for entertainment. It responds to receptivity, not narration. As you move forward, you may notice that signs become simpler, less symbolic, more direct. A clear impulse, a quiet knowing, a sense of timing that requires no evidence. This is maturation. You are no longer dependent on external confirmation. You recognize alignment internally. You trust your orientation. The dialogue becomes less visible because it has become integrated. And this is why some signs should not be spoken about. Not because they are secret in the dramatic sense, but because they are functional. They do their work best when left alone. Let them guide you. Let them inform you. Let them pass through you without announcement. Because the most accurate guidance rarely needs witnesses. It needs trust. Chapter 20. The Return of Natural Authority. Authority does not arrive through force. It returns through alignment. For much of life, authority is borrowed. You look outward for permission, instruction, validation. You learn what is acceptable, what is possible, what is rewarded. This borrowing is not weakness. It is how orientation begins. But borrowed authority was never meant to be permanent. At some point it expires, not dramatically, quietly. You may notice that advice no longer lands the way it once did, that rules feel arbitrary, that instructions feel misaligned. This is not rebellion, it is maturation. The system is no longer calibrated to external command. Natural authority is returning. Natural authority is not dominance. It does not impose. It does not demand compliance. It does not need volume. It is the simple confidence that arises when internal signals agree. When attention, emotion, awareness, and timing align, action carries weight without effort. You do not need to justify yourself. You do not need to persuade. You move, and reality accommodates. This is not charisma, it is coherence. People often confuse authority with control. But control is compensatory. It arises when internal authority is absent. The louder the control, the weaker the alignment behind it. Natural authority is quiet because it does not argue with itself. You feel this in people who do not explain excessively, who do not overreact, who do not chase validation. Their presence stabilizes situations, not because they try to lead, but because they are oriented. Orientation communicates more than instruction ever could. The return of natural authority often begins as discomfort. You may feel less tolerant of misalignment, less willing to perform, less interested in fitting into structures that require self-betrayal. This can feel like loss at first, loss of certainty, loss of belonging, loss of identity, but what is actually dissolving is dependency. Dependency on permission, dependency on approval, dependency on external timing. As dependency fades, discernment sharpens. Discernment is not judgment, it is sensitivity. You sense what fits and what doesn't without needing to analyze. You feel when to say yes and when to decline. You trust these signals because they have proven reliable. This trust does not come from belief, it comes from repetition. You have felt the difference between acting from alignment and acting from pressure. You have experienced the consequences of both. Over time, the system learns which state produces coherence. Natural authority is simply acting from that learned coherence. This authority does not seek leadership roles. It is often noticed rather than claimed. Others may defer to you without knowing why. Situations may resolve around your presence. Decisions may feel obvious when you are involved. This is not superiority, it is clarity. Clarity reduces friction. When you are clear, you do not add noise. You do not complicate. You do not escalate unnecessarily. The environment responds by simplifying. Natural authority also changes how you relate to rules. You no longer need to break them to feel free, nor follow them to feel safe. You understand context. You respond appropriately. Rules become tools rather than identities. This flexibility is a sign of integration. You may notice that you are less reactive to challenge. When questioned, you do not feel threatened. When misunderstood, you do not rush to correct. When confronted, you listen before responding. This is not passivity, it is stability. Stability allows you to choose the most effective response rather than the most immediate one. Often the most effective response is silence. Sometimes it is action, sometimes it is a boundary. Boundaries set from natural authority feel clean. They are not defensive. They do not require explanation. They are simply communicated and held. Others feel them. This is why natural authority is respected even when it is not liked. It does not seek agreement. It seeks alignment. The return of this authority also alters your relationship with failure. You no longer interpret mistakes as personal defects. You see them as feedback. Information arrives, adjustments are made, movement continues. This reduces fear. Fear thrives where authority is external. When authority is internal, fear loses leverage. You trust your capacity to respond, even if outcomes are uncertain. This trust is quiet. It does not announce itself. You may also notice that you no longer rush to position yourself. Titles matter less. Labels feel unnecessary. You know where you stand without needing markers. This is not detachment from ambition. It is refinement of intention. Ambition fueled by external authority seeks recognition. Ambition guided by natural authority seeks coherence. The second is slower but more precise. It wastes less energy. It creates less resistance. Natural authority also deepens listening. When you are not trying to assert yourself, you can receive information fully. You notice nuances others miss. You adjust before problems escalate. This makes your presence valuable without effort. The return of natural authority is not a peak state. It is not permanent intensity. It is a baseline shift. Life feels less chaotic. Decisions feel less heavy. You trust yourself without inflation. This trust is not arrogance. It is grounded. Grounded authority does not fear challenge. It uses it. It does not avoid responsibility. It accepts it selectively. It does not confuse power with pressure. Power here is simply the ability to act without internal contradiction. As you integrate this, you may notice a subtle but important change. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is appropriate now?" This question is situational, not moral. It requires presence, not rules. It invites awareness to lead, and awareness responds. The return of natural authority is not something you achieve. It is something that emerges when everything unnecessary has fallen away, when identity has loosened, when emotional gravity has shifted, when attention has stabilized, when listening has deepened. It was always there. It simply did not have room to speak. Now it does, and when it speaks, it does not shout. It moves. Chapter 21. Living as if nothing changed. The most reliable sign of integration is subtlety. When something truly lands, it does not need announcement. It does not ask for acknowledgement. It simply becomes the new ground you stand on. This is why the final stage often looks like nothing happened. You wake up. You move through the day. You speak, decide, respond. And yet, something is different. Not louder, not brighter, not dramatic, quieter, more precise, more settled. Living as if nothing changed is not denial. It is completion. When a shift is real, it no longer requires attention. It does not ask to be revisited or reinforced. It expresses itself naturally through timing, tone, and choice. This is the opposite of performance. Performance seeks witnesses. Integration seeks stability. When people experience surface change, they often want to show it. They talk about it. They frame it. They narrate their progress. This narration is not wrong, but it signals that the change is still external. Internal change does not narrate itself. It operates. You may notice that you no longer feel compelled to correct others, that you stop explaining your decisions, that you feel less urgency to be understood. These are not withdrawals. They are indicators that your center of gravity has shifted inward. The world no longer needs to mirror you back to confirm your position. This stage requires restraint, not as discipline, but as trust. Trust that what has settled will hold without constant reinforcement. Trust that you do not need to prove alignment by changing everything at once. In fact, dramatic external change too soon can destabilize integration. It reintroduces pressure. It demands coherence before it has fully matured. Living as if nothing changed gives the system time to normalize. Normalization is powerful. When a new orientation becomes ordinary, it stops requiring energy. It stops feeling fragile. It becomes reliable. You do not have to remember it. You live from it. This is how transformation becomes sustainable. You may find that others sense something without being able to name it. They respond differently. Conversations shift. Opportunities appear. This is not because you announced anything, it is because coherence is perceptible. Coherence speaks without words. At this stage, you act when action is appropriate and remain still when it is not. You do not rush to demonstrate progress. You let reality respond in its own way. This patience is not waiting. It is confidence. Confidence here does not mean certainty about outcomes. It means trust in your orientation. You know when to adjust. You know when to stay. You know when to let things unfold without interference. This knowing is calm. You may also notice that challenges no longer feel like interruptions. They are handled proportionally, without escalation, without identity attached. You respond, resolve, and continue. This is mastery without display. Living as if nothing changed also protects what has integrated. It shields it from premature exposure. It allows it to deepen rather than spread thin. There will be moments when you are tempted to test it, to see if it is real, to provoke confirmation. Resist this urge gently. Testing introduces doubt. Doubt introduces noise. Let reality confirm alignment on its own terms. It will, often through ease, through timing, through reduction of friction. These confirmations are quieter than signs but more reliable. They do not excite, they reassure. Eventually, you may forget how things used to feel. The old baseline fades from memory. What once felt like effort now feels unnecessary. What once felt impossible now feels irrelevant. This forgetting is a gift. It means the change has moved beyond contrast and into normalcy. You are no longer comparing states. You are simply living. This is where power stabilizes, not as control, not as intensity, but as availability. You are available to the moment without needing it to be different. You are available to respond without needing to prepare. You are available to act without needing permission. Nothing changed, and because of that, everything did. This is the quiet success of integration, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that lasts. Chapter 22. The Promise You Don't Make Aloud. There is a promise formed at the end of every genuine shift. It is not spoken. It is not declared. It does not require witnesses. It settles quietly, like a knowing that no longer needs language. This promise is not about what you will do next. It is about how you will move forward. When integration completes, ambition changes tone. Desire softens into direction. You no longer need to swear allegiance to a new version of yourself or announce a turning point. Those gestures belong to earlier phases, when identity still needed reinforcement. Here, reinforcement is unnecessary. The promise you don't make aloud is a commitment to coherence, to listening before reacting, to choosing alignment over urgency, to trusting timing more than pressure. You do not say these things because saying them would turn them into concepts, and concepts invite negotiation. This promise does not negotiate, it simply holds. You may notice that you stop bargaining with yourself. Stop setting conditions for peace. Stop postponing presence until something else happens. This is not resignation, it is resolution. Resolution does not argue. The promise is felt most clearly when old patterns try to return, not dramatically but subtly. A familiar pull, a reflex, a temptation to rush, explain, or prove. And something in you pauses, not to fight, not to suppress, just to notice. That pause is the promise at work. It is the decision to remain oriented even when no one is watching. To act from clarity even when confusion would be easier. To trust your internal signal more than external noise. This trust is quiet. You will not always get it right. The promise is not perfection. It is consistency of return. When you drift, you notice sooner. When you react, you recover faster. When you forget, you remember without judgment. This gentleness is strength. The promise you don't make aloud also includes restraint. You do not rush to teach what you are still living. You do not brand what is still breathing. You allow your understanding to remain fluid rather than fixed. Fluid understanding adapts. Fixed understanding defends. Defense is unnecessary now. You may find that you no longer feel the need to convince others of anything. Not because you have withdrawn, but because conviction has settled internally. You know where you stand, and that is enough. This is the end of seeking. Not the end of curiosity, but the end of chasing yourself through ideas, identities, and futures. You are no longer trying to arrive somewhere else. You are here. The promise is simple, though it took many chapters to reach. You will listen. You will listen to your body before your thoughts. You will listen to timing before impulse. You will listen to coherence before expectation. You will listen even when it would be easier not to. This listening does not isolate you from life. It anchors you within it. You move with awareness rather than against it. You allow rather than force. You respond rather than react. And when you forget, as all humans do, you return without drama. This is the promise. Not to never fall back into noise, but to recognize it sooner. Not to always be aligned, but to value alignment enough to come back to it. You do not announce this promise because announcing would make it aspirational. And this is not aspiration, it is orientation. Orientation does not need reinforcement. It guides naturally. It adjusts quietly. It remains even when attention wanders. At some point, you may realize that the search you began with has ended, not because you found an answer, but because the question dissolved. You were never looking for information. You were looking for yourself in experience. Now you are no longer separate from what you were seeking. This does not make life perfect. It makes it workable. And that is enough. So let the promise remain unspoken. Let it live in how you pause, in how you choose, in how you listen. Because the most powerful commitments are not made aloud. They are kept quietly.